Welcome. This is our, I keep calling it, when I talk to Kat, the cursed episode, because we've had a running joke. We're like, Ravi's coming next week, Ravi's coming next week. It's officially...
And here I am.
Here you are. So we're going to be talking a bit about cults. You've got a background in cults, but
yes,
it's a bit wider than that.
I think, first of all, my background, just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Ravi Dave. I've been with the university for about 8 years now, Coventry University. My background is in hate crime, terrorism, and group dynamics and intergroup aggression and how different groups mobilize. Now, fundamentally, when people think about cult, if you think about where it comes from, it's almost was seen as a cool group where people adopt a certain ideology and follow that through. Now, what doesn't come through is that it's not just about a hedonistic lifestyle. It's more about art of persuasion. It's about manipulation. And there are a lot of the negativities in cults as well. Whilst it's seen as adopting an ideology and following somebody influential, the process, the psychological process behind how that happens is quite dark. It's quite antisocial at times as well, and could lead to the segregation of certain people and elements within society, which is obviously the antisocial and the negative side of cult behavior, and how cults, basically the dynamics of cults.
Okay, so I suppose you say like that exclusionary, I suppose it's that idea of like, if you can kind of, I suppose, capture people that are on those like fringes of society and go, well, these people don't accept you, well, we don't accept them, and that's kind of that draw in.
Yeah.
I know in like popular media, cults tend to be, again, like it's quite a mixed, so cults tend to be very stereotypically like occult, satanistic, demons, pentagrams, and stuff like that. And you often see them in like things like video games, for example. They're always like, okay, well, the cultists are the bad guys and so on. My first question then, and this might be like controversial, I suppose, is, has there ever been a good cult? Like, what the idea of like a cult is just a group of people?
See, it's basically how you define cult as well. I think the ultimate thing is that the cult is generally seen to be from a religious section, from a certain ideology section, which often was a means to establish some form of another group that was parallel to the predominant group. So, for instance, you have many cults in different religions. I mean, to name a few, you have a different cult in Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. They all have different groups that are still Christian, but have their own ideology about some of the ways or the practices. So, in that sense, could you say that they're bad? Not necessarily. They could be functional for the given time and place. So it may be that some practices were, outdated. So they thought, actually, you know what, we're carrying on this tradition, culture, religion, and it's no longer functional. Remember, the biggest thing, if you look at Charles Darwin, what he says, it says survival of the fittest. What we're trying to do is we're trying to evolve all the time. Now, if we're trying to evolve all the time, how do we do that if we're following traditional values that no longer make sense? So people may develop that ideology and then it becomes like, oh, that's a cult, because it doesn't subscribe to the original values set out, the 10 Commandments or the different religious codes and context that every religion gives. Then it's almost identified as a cult, but it's not a bad thing. So I don't think cult, the way we understand it, is very satanic, very antisocial, but there are some good elements to cults as well. I mean, if you think about protests, the protests that are done for the right reasons is technically a cult ideology. They don't agree with the status quo, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to re-establish that, and they're doing that through sometimes peaceful ways. And of course, when we think about the satanic one, we see the other side as well, where protests are done in a very antisocial way. Violence, no longer the real reason why people are protesting. So all these things can make up a cult. So I think whether you see a cult as a good or bad thing is a matter of perspective, and I think people lose sight of that sometimes cults can be a good thing. Sometimes cults might be pro-social, but it depends on where you sit in the level of persuasion that actually makes you feel, or where you sit in terms of your perspective that means something is good or bad.
Okay, so I guess like that's the intent, and I suppose like the phrase cult is maybe more like co-opted in general society to be very negative valenced, and we don't like this group and they're a bit of an outsider, they're a cult, rather than it just being like, well, actually, like you said, lots of things can be a cult.
Absolutely.
Because I know that there's, like, if you go online, you see a lot of conversation around, like, okay, the idea that I always keep in mind is, are you familiar with Jared Leto?
No, I'm not.
He is. Do you watch movies much?
I'm not much of a movie person, so that's where I'm probably a bit.
So he's an actor. He was in the latest Tron movies. He's the Joker, the one with the tattoos all over his face. Okay, yes. So there's been a lot of conversation about that. He allegedly has a cult.
Yeah.
So he had like a band, like a rock band, and then he's an actor, and he's kind of done a bit of both here and there. And he has this like membership where he kind of has an island, and people go to the island and to spend time with him, and there's some pictures of him in like these white flowing robes, and everybody like follows him around and almost like praises him.
Yeah.
And it comes across as very like weird and just socially like the whole idea of kind of like celebrity praise and obsession is obviously like we could spend all day talking about that. Of course. But having this like exclusionary like, well, you paid to come to this island to almost worship me or like spend time with me. So it kind of fits in with this idea that people throw around this word cult. And I've always kind of gone, is it actually a cult though?
I think it draws a lot of similarities between the traditional idea of cult. Yeah. Somebody who doesn't fit into the mainstream ideology or mainstream ideas of what a person should be like. Yeah. So what we expect people to be like in society, following the social norms, and if they don't do that, they're obviously seen as a bit odd. And then when they have a mass following as well, if they are seen as eccentric or odd, and then other people are following them, then it almost creates that like they're a separate group, which can be classed as cult. If you think about where cult comes from, it comes from a very ancient ideology where people were groups within society that were almost segregated because of them being different. Now, we followed on with that idea of cult being different. So when anyone does anything different in a group, almost given the cult status. But I can see the reasons why it might be seen as cult as well, because there's one influential person, totalitarian regime, everybody's worshipping, and they're making the decisions for the mass groups. So it's almost like a blind herd following for one person because they're an idol, because they're a celebrity, because they're somebody in power. What we call in social identity and social dynamics as prestige bias. So this person has a high level of prestige in the group, very, very much in an elevated position, revered by the whole group, and they make decisions for the masses, and people follow blindly. So from that point of view, whether it's because they believe in whatever they're saying, whether it's because it's blind following, maybe because they haven't got time to critically evaluate what's being said, or simply because they have nothing else to do and they want to join in something that seems cool at the time. All of these things actually are the classic, if you call it symptoms, the classic symptoms of a cult leader and the cult following. So for that reason, I can see why it would be seen as a cult, and why it fits in the the traditional, or the at least the literary definition of a cult.
Okay, so back to this idea that it's quite like a broader description than we might
stereotypically. Absolutely, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I think anything we do in group dynamics, I think there's it's very multifaceted. I think there are many different factors that need to be seen for what they are, and I think what happens is that people just see it as black and white. It's very much a linear thinking of this must equal that, and that's not the case, because there's so many different dynamics coming in: culture, religion, gender, age, all the lifelong things on which people have been segregated, or they've prospered because of being males. Of course, in a patriarchal society, it's good to be a male in a patriarchal society because you get more advantages than females. So these kind of things have a huge impact on the way people mobilize, how groups mobilize, and generally you find that cult leaders are males. There are very few examples of females being cult leaders. Why? Because males, naturally patriarchal or ancient patriarchal ideas is that male know what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying that's true. This is nothing against females, or it's nothing to counter feminism, but it's the ideology through which cult became almost famous, and majority of them are dominated by males because of the level of influence and power they had, and power is a huge thing in cults.
So I suppose that like normalization of almost like societal structures mirrors a lot of like modern day politicians nowadays. Absolutely. We are seeing a lot more. America's probably the best example, but even in the UK we're seeing it, that it's not always necessarily the ideas, but it's the charisma and the almost like enthusiasm behind a message rather than what that message is. Okay. You were mentioning that, so these cults are like these like fringe groups that are like challenging the status quo. I'm curious if is there a point where a cult then starts to become the status quo? Or if there's like an example where like a small group has grown and grown and grown and just been, oh, well, yeah, they're now just a part of like a regular recognised part of society perhaps.
Absolutely. There's a very controversial example, which probably not great for this podcast, okay. Which I don't want to say. But no, there are times where you get small groups in society, where you get small groups in society where they're genuinely fighting for a cause, and they divide the society in two. For instance, sometimes you might have political leaders, where you've got people, they start off as a small party, and they start to gain, they gain followers. They gain power, they gain status, and then a party that was previously not seen as a challenge then become a challenge.
Yeah.
And now if you talk about the BNP, now initially I'm not from England, I wasn't born in England, but when I first came to the UK, we're talking 94, it was all Labour. We're talking all Labour Party. Now, if you look at the history of England and the way things have gone, Labour, even though they're in power, they're starting to lose the stronghold that they had, and you're seeing a lot more nationalist fronts coming through, nationalist ideologies coming through. People should be following what it's like to be British, and these narratives are coming through. So if you think about it from that point of view, then there's a lot more power given to nationalist parties that wasn't there previously. Previously, there was never need for that, but now there's this whole talk. If you talk about Brexit, drawn through the lines of immigration and how immigration is a problem in the UK, and that led to the Brexit. And since then, we are seeing that more and more nationalist ideology, nationalist parties are getting a stronghold. So that may be, in a way, an ideology. I'm not saying it's a cult. All I'm saying is that's the way a cult can establish themselves.
Yeah.
So, we can draw examples from real politics and group dynamics and how that might be similar for a cult as well.
Okay. I know you mentioned you didn't want to provide, I think for academic freedom, I don't know if you want to...
I think it's...
got an example in mind?
Okay, so I'm going to say it very generically.
Yeah.
Now, when religions are established, the religions don't establish in a vacuum. They basically have somebody saying, this is how life should be.
Yeah.
This is how we should go about it. Now, whatever name we give it to the religious leader or the person who's spreading the message of religion, ultimately, it would have started off as a cult.
Yeah, okay.
Because they would have gone from the traditional religions or traditional civilization. I'm not going to say religion because that almost insinuates that there's a religion before religion came. That's a totally different type of theological argument. But what I'm saying is that when religion was first introduced to civilization, because if you believe that there are so many religions in the world, and there's a timeline of when they first, when the messages were first given to people, they would have been started as a cult.
Yeah.
And they would have got mass following. And those cults are now seen as mainstream religions.
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying here.
Yeah. So I suppose the argument is that any religion essentially started as a cult. But I suppose we'll do the disclaimer to re-emphasize this fact that cult isn't always necessarily negative, and it's so
because end of the day, what happens is that religion is simply a way of life.
Yeah.
So if you look at the way civilization works, when I talk about civilization, I mean the way people carry on their everyday life. Religion is a set of guidelines or rules that one follows for a better life.
Yeah.
Now, every religion has this idea of a better life, better person, being a better person, and depending on what type of religion you come from, Zoroastrians or otherwise, you'd say, well, there's heaven or hell at the end of it. So everyone is in this pursuit of being a better human to achieve nirvana or heaven. So religion, if you think about it at its core, is just how to be a good human. The cult comes in religion when you've got people telling you how it's about being a good person by attacking other people.
Yeah.
So that's where my cult is. Now, I mean, I come from a background of, research in terrorism. Now, if we talk about Al-Qaeda, to me, is a cult.
Yeah.
Because there's no way in the Quran or the Islam doesn't say you have to kill innocent people. But the framework through which Al-Qaeda works is, no, actually, jihad is not about being a better human. It is about that in the core sense of Islam, but jihad is almost like waging war on other people. Whereas actually what jihad means is taking out the negativities within you. And now if you think about drawing parallel to Hinduism, many gods, people see many gods, people see all these weapons, and all of a sudden people assume that it's a very violent religion. Why are there so many weapons? Every single weapon is basically saying, through the weapons that you have, the weapons are symbolism of knowledge. So with every acquirement of knowledge, you should be killing the negativity within you. Bitterness, jealousy, laziness, so pretty much the 10 Commandments, all linked on. So Islam, Hinduism, Christianity. If you think about the deeper message under all of them, they're fundamentally the same about how to be a better human. Now, when I talk about cult, there's of course saffron terrorism, what they call the saffron terrorism, which is a sect of Hinduism that is waging war on other people in the name of religion. Now, that itself is a cult, because nowhere within Hinduism there is this thing about you must kill other people to be a Hindu. Or I'm sure in Islam there's nothing to say you must wage war on other people, crusaders or anything. If you talk about the history of religion as well. So I know I'm drawing a lot on religion, but cult was initially, in its very infancy, came from this different from the religion. So it's all merged together, and there are still cults that are within religion which are still talking about to be a better person, you have to wage war, which is a very cult ideology. And more people buy into that.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what to think.
Yeah.
Now, when people don't know what to think, somebody will do the thinking for them. Mm-hmm. And because of lack of critical evaluation, lack of critical appraisal of the information available, like if you're going to religious school for the first time, what they're saying, what the texts have said, if you don't know the language, you're down to interpretation. Now, if you can't interpret that, then you fundamentally got a problem that you're actually listening into what somebody's saying. Now, you don't know how correct they are in what they're saying. So you're taking on the ideology, which is far away from the actual religion itself, which means you're more drawn to the cult because you see them as influential knowledge, fountain of knowledge, and you follow that. I would say blindly in this case, because you've got no other means of seeing, you can't verify what they're saying is true or not. And that's where cults have an advantage, because they pick on people who have very limited knowledge, or whereby they can see themselves as prestige and influential, and people will follow that. Sorry, I've gone a full circle, but it's just all comes together.
Yeah, so I know that Scientology tends to come up quite a lot when people talk about religious sects of cults. Because I know in America it's recognised as a religion, but in the UK I believe it's not.
Yeah.
Because of this discrepancy. But while you were saying that, there's just something came into my head, and it's almost like part of me's kind of like, okay, we're both going to identify as part of this group. You've got people who, they've got the power, they're telling you this is the way that it is, this is how the world works, you don't know how to verify this, and I'm going to just charismatically, or as charismatically as possible, try to convince you that this is how it is. Is science a cult? Scientists that go out and do this research and come in and go, this is how the sky is blue, this is where rain comes from.
Again, it's how you define cult, and it's again how you. Yeah. Why is it that science cannot always prove things? So if you cannot prove things, then you must be able to say things happen. Now, if you are saying things happen because there are no explanations for some things, I mean, I know all scientists would agree. I mean, of course, as psychologists, we're scientists as well. Although hard scientists have their own view of science. But ultimately, we have to sometimes say things happen. Now, if we're saying things happen and we have no explanation, there's two ways of looking at it. One, we don't know enough. Mm-hmm. Two, we can say, well, you know what, we can't explain it. So there must be some other power, force, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if you come from a religious perspective, then you'd say, well, it's got to be religion because science can't prove everything. But science might say, well, actually, we've got enough information that we're able to live life and we're constantly discovering things. Is science a cult? Then if it is, I would think it's quite a progressive one, because it's giving us knowledge. It's being able to tell us things that we didn't know before. Yeah. So science can be seen as a cult because they have their set idea. Deductivism, inductivism has to be this way. If it doesn't fit in with this hypothesis, then it's incorrect. Now, of course, we know there's a problem with that as well. We've got the whatever doesn't fit in with the model of normal distribution curve and all of that. We've got all of those problems, but generally it's a positive cult because we're increasing our knowledge. How we didn't know a lot of the things before. It's like when COVID happened, new to everyone, but science very quickly did what it needed to, and we were told what we can't do and what we shouldn't do to reduce the number of casualties and deaths that we had. So is science a cult? They said this is what we must do, and we kind of followed that blindly. I know there was people who said they don't want vaccines and stuff like that. That's fine. Everyone has their freedom of expression and choice. But ultimately, science is not a bad thing. It's a problem when science then becomes dictating in how we do things. If that was said that everybody has to have a COVID vaccine and that is the only way, then I think that's when it becomes a cult. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know who is actually making the money, who is actually benefiting from it. I mean, Moderna, Pfizer, all of these companies were making the vaccines at the time, and there's a huge push to have as many as possible. And the share market just went crazy for Moderna. They shot up. So, those kind of things, that there's always that need for critical evaluation of how much is true, how much is not true. Yeah. But I think science, in my opinion at least, if science is a cult, then I don't think it's bad as long as it's serving society. I think the fundamental thing is how much it serves society. A cult doesn't have to be negative, in my opinion. The ideology and understanding of cult, yes, always been negative. But if you think about it more critically, with more clear inspection of what it's doing, the type of cult we're looking at, then I think it does have some positive elements as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's, I suppose, interesting perspective, this idea, because like sometimes when I'm teaching students, and you're I was teaching yesterday, we were looking at mindfulness. Yeah. In the first year module, and it was a lot of like exploring what it is, and I come from that like hard science cogneuro background, and counselling is like not diametrically opposed but theoretically on the opposite end of the spectrum for quite a lot of it. And it almost felt as we're showing clips to the students of, here's John Kabat-Zinn giving a guided meditation thing. John's the guy that basically founded mindfulness in the West, for anybody not aware, but he's also accused of establishing what's called McMindfulness. I'm sure you're fully aware of this, like pre-packaged, just rapidly throw it out to everybody, and the quality maybe isn't great, like McDonald's and so on. By the end of it though, what I'd realised was the entire class had taken my viewpoint of like, we were going, this is what mindfulness is. Here's loads of like, we in the seminar we watched like a TED talk and a guided relaxation, and various different people, professionals, very respected professionals in the field, talking about, this is how I got into mindfulness, this is why it values to me. And by the end of it, all of the students in the class were going, rubbish, garbage, don't believe them, their approach to this is biased. One of them was a lady that was talking about her like background and how she started to discover mindfulness, and she'd basically gone on, when she was younger, a trip to Thailand to go and like spend time with monks to learn mindfulness because she was struggling. And one of the students was just like, well, yeah, it just comes from a place of privilege. She's this American girl that just went off to another country, learned mindfulness, and like thought it was really like novel, and brought it back with her as like we kind of described it as a class as like a new toy almost. And whilst we're going through the discussion, I'm like, it feels almost kind of cultish that I've come in with this, right, well, we're going to look at it, but I'm also going to mention that we need to be critical of everything that we do. And by the end, everybody felt like they were just echoing my thoughts, and I hadn't even necessarily said them. And it sometimes feels like, as a teacher, you almost like have this like power over generating almost like that ideology. Absolutely. Even if it's fringe ideology, over this like group of students, because they look at you as the scientist, as the person that knows it. And that's always been something that you like. I always try and make this argument. I was saying in a couple of episodes ago with Kat that I like to pull up like a copy of one of my like cogneuro research papers for the students, don't give them my name, show them the paper, ask them how much they trust it, and I always tell them like, don't trust it, like this person doesn't know everything, and then show them that it was me that wrote it, and get them to go through this process of like, they have to question us. I think for like this idea of like generating a cult, it's important that we have, the leaders have this attitude of, I'm not automatically right, and you have to like question that. So I suppose this idea of like religion's always quite interesting, and how that builds in, and politics as well. I never really looked at it from this aspect that politics could become so, like, again, like, cultish.
Yeah.
I know that people often look at, like, the extreme fringes of both right and left wing, and how they kind of, like, generate almost cult behaviours depending on the perspective that you're on. You know, I tend to consider myself, like, very left wing, and that idea, you know, look at it and I kind of go, no, it's not a cult. I'm not in a cult. You know, I don't feel like I have a leader. You know, but I don't know if does the ideology have to have a leader, basically? Does there have to be somebody that you point to and go, they're the one that decides the rules, or can it be a communally decided?
Couple of things really interesting, and I tell you why you're not a cult. And I'm sure, I think one of the things you said is you're happy to be challenged.
Yeah.
Now, whenever, I mean, I'm sure a lot of my students will watch this, and you know, people I've worked with, I always say, if you're unsure in my class, if what I say doesn't make sense or doesn't sit well with you, come and talk to me. Tell me where I'm wrong. I'm happy to have a discussion. Now, that's the difference between a cult and a non-cult.
Yeah.
Because a non-cult will tell you, well, challenge me if I'm wrong. A cult you cannot challenge. So there is this very much indoctrined kind of dogma that they follow. And no, you cannot challenge them. And why it cannot be communal, even though it may seem like a communal, you always have a lead. Because when you have multiple people, it becomes Chinese whispers. Mm-hmm. And the actual ethos or the strength of the ideology starts to diffuse. And when that happens, the overall structure of the cult can become a bit weak and sporadic. So this is why generally what you find is that one or two people are usually the head. And what they do is they have a set of influential people, secretaries, PAs, whatever they may be in a cult. And they're the people who are recruiting. So at the top, the ideology, so people are recruiting are following the ideology of the people at the top, one or two people generally, and then that gets disseminated down. But ultimately, these people, you'll find that the cult will generally not be able to see the leader of the cult. And if they do, it's only once or twice in a given time frame. Now, the reason for that is to maintain the identity of the leader. If you saw somebody regularly, they're no longer important to you.
Yeah.
It's like saying, you know, if you saw Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo every day, they'll lose their importance.
There he is.
But you'll pay hundreds and millions of pounds or whatever to go and see them. And that is a status that they hold. Now, when you think about cult leaders, they do the same. You might be staying at the, you know, I don't know, the asylums or, you know, their refuge or whatever establishment they have, but you will not get to see them. You might get to see them for 15, 20 minutes in a sermon or when they're delivering a speech. That's to maintain that prestige. Mm-hmm. Now, the more exposure you have to something, the more commonplace it becomes. So they maintain that lack of exposure, so people still revere them, see them as godlike. Mm-hmm. And this is why generally it tends to be one or two people who are there controlling everything, but rarely seen. Mm-hmm. So the ideology that is being followed is still to do with them. Or their ideology being passed down, but they're rarely seen. So people are in this awe of, oh my God, what can I do? What can I do to see this? It's like, you know, people who are highly religious. They will practice religion extensively because they have this hope that one day I'll reunite with God or I'll see God, depending on which religion you're from. Ultimately, all those practices are there because of the awe that you have for a figure. Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately how cult is working as well. So there'll be two influential people within that group as leaders, who everyone is almost, probably not the right word, but dying to meet.
Yeah.
And that keeps them doing what they do. And there's two fundamental things, is that people who are in cults are not allowed to think. So you will find that they have extreme regimes, extreme methods or extreme chores they'll have to do. Now, when you're doing something that requires a lot of cognitive effort, you're not allowed to think, because you can't do both at once. Because you have to focus on the task. So if you're focusing on the task, your mind is not free to think. Now, because you can't think, you only go by the ease. Remember, we're all cognitive misers. We want the least cognitive load as possible. So we'll just take on the ideology that other people give us when we don't need to think. So that's why you'll find that cults have extreme behaviors, regimes, or set of tasks that they'll get the followers to do. Or they'll just get them to focus on the one ideology, which doesn't allow them to think. Because if you think about everything that's wrong, then you'll no longer be part of the cult, because every cult will have something that's incorrect, malpractice, but that never comes to the fore for the people who are following. So they're blindly going into this, and the more you hear something, the more it becomes second nature.
Yeah.
So they start to follow the ideology to the point that they don't even know they're following the ideology.
Mm-hmm.
So they become part of almost like passively become part of the cult, and they don't even know. Through the ideology passed on from the top.
So I guess this idea of like overwhelm them,
Yes.
and then give them like almost like a template of just how to
Absolutely.
cope with it.
Yeah.
So quite a like nasty but well thought out tactic to just like go in from all sides.
It's manipulation tactic.
Yeah.
It's persuasion at first, persuasion to get them into the cult, and then manipulation to keep them there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fundamentally a game of persuasion manipulation. It's basically power of persuasion.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And the more you can persuade people, and people who have no other kind of goal, or people who find they don't have a purpose, they are very easy to manipulate. People who think their life is going very negative, people who can't see any hope, they tend to be easier to manipulate purely because they're trying to find a purpose. It's social identity at its best. It's basically people who don't have inclusion, seek inclusion, and these groups are readily available for them. This is how recruitment for terrorism works. People who have no hope, have no luxuries in life, are probably struggling with basic needs in life. They're the easiest to recruit because you can offer them even the little bit, and even the little bit that you offer means a lot to them. So if you say to them, well, your family hasn't got enough money to eat, you say, okay, look, if you come and join this terrorist group, your family will be taken care of the rest of your life. Why not? They almost feel like it's a very like sacrificial thing that they're doing for their family. They're sacrificing themselves for the betterment of their family. So they see themselves as the hero. Now, we're not going into Jungian psychology here, but Jungian psychology says that we all have an archetype. We want to be a hero in our eyes and in the eyes of other people. And this is why we may adopt this subconscious ideology of heroism by sacrificing ourselves. And in countries that are less affluent, more poorer population, it's a lot more easier to recruit terrorists because they don't have any means of improving the status quo, because probably poor, so less power, probably from places that are not very powerful, and no chance of fighting against the dominant ideology. So that's how persuasion works at a cult level, terrorism level as well. So there's a mapping between groups, and I guess this is why I said that cult depends on how you see it, and can every group be a cult? And yeah, ultimately the kind of scripts that they have all follow that of a cult.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. How do you get into this field? So, like, you obviously very knowledgeable, and you lots of like broad examples. How did you start out looking at things like extremism and cults?
To be honest, I was never politically inclined. I was always interested by people. So, I mean, I as a kid went through all my motions of what I want to be when I grow up. I wanted to be a barrister at one point, wanted to be a poet at one point, wanted to be a police officer. Everything done. Then I wanted to be a cardiologist, neuroscientist, and then I finally settled with psychology. And it's really interesting how it came about. Now, I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist, and it's only when my sister was doing A-level and she was revising, she'd get me to read the notes, and she's like, can you just test me, see if I remember? And I said, okay. And that's when I realised, actually, psychology is a thing for me. And then my uncle served in the army. My other uncle was in the police in India, and my dad was in the police as well. So I've always had this thing about, how do groups work, how does politics work, but never been inclined towards it. But more recently, I think the more I've been following what's happening in group dynamics led me to my undergraduate dissertation in terrorism. My master's was in, if you remember, there was a student protest in London following the student fee rise.
Yeah.
So when it went to 3,000, 9,000, and I think, I can't remember, Pink Floyd's son or somebody at the Cenotaph damaged property and public disorder. Back in, I think it was back in 2010, 2009.
2012, because 2011 I went to university.
So 2012,
and I was the last group that got the lower rate.
Yes,
so.
But that, I think just a year before that, when they introduced it, before they fully brought it into enforcement, that's when there was protest and damage to a lot of the, sites, preserved sites were damaged, and that kind of, I devised a scale called the student militancy scale. So how highly educated highly capable, highly affluent people can become militants. So that was a scale, never published it, but I had the student militant scale, and that made me think, like, if people are so educated, they have so much knowledge, then it isn't what we've been sold about knowledge. It's not that people who are poor, people who don't have any ideological, background, so in the sense that they don't know what they feel about things. It's not only them. Anyone can potentially be a militant, a terrorist, or antisocial. And that kind of made me think, okay, what am I really interested in? And then, of course, the events that happened. So I looked at the September 11, 7th of July, 2005 in London, India in 2008, 26/11 in India. And then after that, there's a series of terrorist attacks. I'm like, oh, I wonder why these are happening. What is happening? How are young kids who are 8, 9-year-olds wrapping bombs around them and just going out in public? What is happening here? What's the psychology? And what's happening in global politics? And I think that was a period, because when there was a hostage at Taj Hotel in Mumbai, it was actually it was 1 week after my birthday. So 26/11, I saw that and I thought, what is going on? Like unprovoked. And that got me into thinking about it. So when I came into my PhD proposal, my proposal was to see how terrorism affects even the affluent, the educated, and the young, rather than it being. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to prove that it's not just the uneducated, poor, and things. But my PhD proposal was absolutely trashed, and I wasn't allowed to do that PhD for many reasons. Purely because it was highly controversial, and even though I wasn't, it was seen to be insinuating that certain elements of society are by default terrorists, and that absolutely wasn't the rationale that I was going for. But then after that, I had to go to there's a paper called Terrorism or Hate Crime, Distant Relative or a Close Cousin. So I ended up looking at hate crime, and my predominant focus was to see why do people commit crimes based on the prejudice, based on religious or racial hatred towards other people. And that ultimately became my PhD. But then since then, I've always been interested in politics, right-wing, left-wing, group formation, and why people act the way they do in the name of race, religion, culture, whatever it may be. And why there's such a negativity towards the way people dress, because one of my studies looked at Islamophobia and why Muslim women are being predominantly attacked purely because of the visibility in society. They wear the hijab, the burqa, and it's very easy to spot a Muslim woman. Muslim men slightly more difficult, because there's a lot of misidentification, and Sikh men, because they look like Muslim men, can be attacked, whereas Muslim women's identity is very clear. Yeah. You can tell when she's a Muslim, and the kind of victimization they go through and the experiences that they have. So I was very much interested in how to safeguard the Muslim women, so everyone has a right to live freely, and if they're being attacked because of their religious identity or the way they dress, then of course that's a negative element of society which needs addressing. So that's how I got into the whole cult group dynamics, and somebody saying you should do this and people go and follow it. Abu Hamza the Hookman in Finchley Park, I think it was in 2010, when he said we need to wage war against the UK, and that was like, there were people actually on the streets and they were supporting him, even though what he was saying was inflammatory, was against the ethos of the UK. But there was a mass support. And I thought, well, if somebody who's not even British can come and say these things, and people are absolutely, when he has a track record of antisocial and terrorist activities, if he can be that influential, then what is happening here? What is the ideology here? And why are people committing, despite knowing it's illegal, antisocial and against the law of the land, which every religious book says that you should be following the law of the land. Even then, somebody is saying something that is totally anti-religious, against the ethos, and people are still supporting. So what is happening here? What's that prestige bias? And that's obviously a cult in itself.
Yeah. Okay. So what kind of research did you do? Because Kat and I have been talking previously about the kinds of studies that we'd run to look at this. What kind of approaches do you take?
So I'm predominantly a mixed methods researcher. So what I like to do is I like to look at, okay, this is what the stats and data says, but what are the experiences and understanding of people as well. So if we consider I'll tell you the 3 different or 4 different things I did. So for my undergraduate, I did a repertory grid. So basically it's like Kelly, 1955, he spoke about the repertory grid where you can have two opposite ideas on the either end, and then you get people to mark which one they agree with. So it might be calmness and chaos. And how much do they see it to be calmness or chaos? So thinking about things in terms of polarity. Altai basically spoke about the whole nature of terrorism is to create chaos. Now, what I found in my study was that it's not the case. People are a lot more calm and composed than we actually expect. So the whole idea of wanting to create chaos is no longer there. Have people gotten better at dealing with this? Then maybe it is. So that was my first thing I look at. Tell me if I'm going on.
No, honestly, the detail's great.
So repertory grid was the first thing I did. So I got them to watch 3 different videos. So 9/11, 7/7 in London, and then 26/11 in Mumbai, and then got them to see how they actually saw the different clips. Now, the reason for that was that if it was happening far away from them, so if they're British and they're looking at an American clip, are they really that much bothered? Do they really care? As opposed to if it happened in London, which is close to home. So if something happens close to you, of course, it's going to make you more panicked, more chaos, and more emotional as well. What I found that there's no difference between the clip. They're all seen exactly the same way. So the concept of terrorism is embedded the same anywhere it happens in the world. Now, I expected a culture difference. Now, this isn't a racist thing, but it's just that I expected those who are white British to identify more with America and UK than they do with India. Because naturally, they don't understand the socialization process and how things work there. But they were actually like, well, no, the images were such that all of them drew parallel. People were dying, blood everywhere. So it kind of got me to think that, you know what, we don't know enough about terrorism just yet. Or at least the way people think about terrorism, we don't know. That led me to my obviously next student militancy, and I'm like, okay, you know what, everything I've read about poor people, young kids, all of that, and I'm like, no, that's not true, because there's educated people, there's males and females, and a lot of the time the terrorist acts that took place were not even about the actual issue itself. There were people just going there because they're like, well, all my friends were going, so I'm just going to go. Sensation seeking. So the concept of sensation seeking, where people just go to just have fun. So sometimes a lot of these protests I found were like, because people are like, oh, I've got Saturday afternoon off, let's go. And if you look at it from a hate crime perspective, then Maggiore et al., I think it's 2002, spoke about, there's 4 different categories of crime. There's thrill seeking, missionary, defense, and there's one more, retaliatory. Now what I found is that a lot of the youth kind of protests are very thrill-seeking. They do it because I'm going to join this because it's good fun. Let's go and see what everyone's up to. So it's almost like an entertainment thing. When young people didn't have a lot to do, they joined in protest. Whereas those that are at the terrorist level were more about mission or defense. Either they think they're defending the land or mission to establish an ideology across the globe. So that was fundamentally what led to my final PhD proposal. So for that, like I said, I used multiple regression, but devised my own student militancy skills. So I looked at neo-FFIR, which is the psychological traits, looked at sensation seeking, mating effort, so when people act macho to attract partners, and the student militancy skill, which I devised myself just to see what was happening. In fact, thrill seeking, so sensation seeking and mating effort was a better predictor of student militancy than the actual ideology itself. So sometimes what happens is that the ideology goes into the background and people are more focused on what is it, or what's in it for them. And then finally I came onto my PhD. For my first thing I did a coding dictionary, so that was a new concept at the time. I looked at newspaper articles of hate crimes in the UK from, I think it was 18 months. 18 months I looked at all the LexisNexis, the database for all newspapers, and then looked at what are the key features. Is exploratory. So every time I found something new, I put it as a variable into SPSS and said, so for instance, psychopathology. If there's a mention of psychopathology, what type of psychopathology do they have? Weapon, what type of weapon are they using? Area, where is it happening? Streets, park, community centres. Just to understand, in the last 18 months, which I believe is comprehensive understanding of where hate crimes are taking place, where are they taking place? What methods are being used? What are the weapons being used? All of this was to give a comprehensive understanding of, if you're looking at hate crime, these are the kind of things you're more likely to find, just to develop the knowledge of hate crimes and its perpetration in society. That led me on to my study too. In my study 2, I did a story completion task. Now, that was never been done in psychology at the time, at least because hate crime comes from a criminology perspective, so it's more, hate crime is more a criminological concept. And I wanted to bring the psychology of it. So I got participants to complete a story stem. Now, I gave them a story stem of, imagine, you're a person and you encounter hate crime. So there are 3 different types. There's a 3x3 matrix. So either they're writing the story from a race, religious, or unspecified hate crime, where they don't get told what the hate crime is, or from the perspective of the victim, police, or the defendant, or the perpetrator. So they had to say, if they were in a race hate crime, how would they write the story as a victim? How would they write as a perpetrator? So how would they defend what they've done? And how would the police see it? So trying to understand that, do people know enough about hate crime? Now, one of the fundamental things about hate crime is underreported. But how can you report something you don't know?
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, is there enough knowledge in the general public to be able to report hate crime? I went to University of Lincoln as my undergraduate. If you've ever been to the cathedral, beautiful. It's one of the nicest place to be. That's where graduations happen as well. So it's on the steep hill, and I remember around 11:30, 12 o'clock, me and my friend just went there. It's summer, so we just thought, we're just going to go for a walk. And it's all dark in the area, and I could hear a voice saying, "Have you got your passport?" or "Have you got a passport?" And I'm like, that's interesting. I've never had that. Lincoln has treated me really well. I've never had any racist comments. And there were 2 or 3 times somebody in the shadow basically, and racist remarks. And I'm like, I just ignored it. I just laughed it off. Realistically, should that have been reported? Now, if you look at the hate crime literature, that should have been recorded, or reported even, because there is more chance of that escalating. So the people who often don't report hate crimes are more likely to be victimized.
Yeah.
Now, luckily I wasn't, but these are the kind of things. But I didn't know that at the time. Being in education, being in academia, knowing all the things I know about crime and psychology, I didn't report it. But even now, I'm thinking like I should have reported that.
Yeah.
Because somebody else wouldn't be so lucky and they may have been victimized because of that. So that led me on to the next thing of, okay, maybe this is something that we need to understand. So this is why I used a story completion task, which I thought was a great method in the end, because it really gave me really good understanding of what people know and what they don't know. So add to the literature. And my final study, study 3, I had more studies, but they said you've got too many things going on here. So my final study, my third study, I wanted to do a path analysis. So I wanted to do structural equation modeling. I wanted to see prejudice, like what are the reasons behind people's prejudice. So I looked at religious commitment, religious fundamentalism. So are people who are highly religious more likely to be prejudiced? Now that's contradictory, because a lot of the literature says that religion is about forgiveness. Now if it's about forgiveness, you wouldn't be prejudiced. Unfortunately, the literature says the higher you are in religiosity, the more violent and aggressive you are. This is purely because you become more authoritarian. Anything that doesn't fit in with your ideology, you start to disagree with. And that itself, there's a whole plethora of literature that talks about why that's problematic. So, you can have people who have a fixed ideology, again, a cultish ideology, and they'll think, okay, no, this is the only way we could go about it. So going on to my third study, I did a path analysis looking at religious commitment, religious fundamentalism, culture-free self-esteem, culture-free because I wanted to be able to see if self-esteem is a big thing, and also how it generalized attitude towards immigrants, so what that means for prejudice and the high number of hate crime towards a BAME society, black, Asian, minority ethnics, and wanted to see how that maps on. And I found that actually there is a mediation, that people high in vengeance. Now vengeance might be, this whole ideology that immigrants are impinging on the British resources, might be, or realistic threats. If you look at integrated threat theory, then not having jobs, not being able to book NHS appointments might be displaced. That frustration might be displaced onto the immigrants, and they're taking all our jobs, they're taking all our appointments, so we don't have it as indigenous, white, British. So, all those kinds of frustrations were kind of coming through. And it made me think that actually, I've not even touched the tip of the iceberg here. There are so many different sentiments that are underlying why people feel strong levels of prejudice towards people. And I didn't actually complete the structural equation modelling, purely because with the path analysis, they said you've got enough for a PhD. So that's where I stopped. But yeah, ultimately I've used multiple different methods, and they were contemporary for the time.
Yeah.
Repertory grid had never been used in research, in terrorist research. Student militancy scale was new, and we'd gone through the psychometrics to develop that as well. Coding dictionary wasn't done previously. Story completion task was the first time I did it, at least at the time I was the first one to do it in psychology. And structural equation modelling, had it have been done, would have added a bit more to the field of hate crime. So, I mean, it just fell in my lap that I thought of these ideas, and my supervisors were great. They said, you know what, this is a great idea, and they kind of guided me through the process, which was really important for me to really understand things. And, you know, I learned a lot about myself, about my own limitations and my own almost boxed thinking, very black and white thinking. And I think that was a great thing about going through these different ways of looking at things, understanding different things, working with different perpetrators and victims, that made me feel like actually there's a greater need for reflection and reflexivity of practice, which was obviously a great thing in hindsight.
Okay, so it sounds like a very productive time, at least.
Stressful. I'm not gonna sit here and say, you know what, everything was quite rosy. It was very stressful.
Yeah.
So I had to change a supervisory team mid PhD, and now I hear people say most people pack their bags when that happens. So my story was a bit different. I first of all, I paid for my PhD because it was such a niche topic, nobody would pay. So I basically paid for my PhD, very expensive. And then when I got into my PhD, I realised that I didn't do anything for the first year and a half, because I think, I mean, I'm not going to go into the nits and crannies of it, but anyway, I didn't do as much as I should have done. And then unfortunately my dad fell ill. He was diagnosed with cancer, and 6 months later from the diagnosis, he passed away. So my supervisor said, you're not fit to study. So I had to take a year of interruption, and I went back and realised that my supervisor had left the university. That means I've got a PhD, I've just come back from interruption, I've got no direction, or no real direction of where I'm going, and I've got no supervisors either. So very quickly, Dr. Patrick Hilton, University of Lincoln, he was lovely. He said, look, he was my undergraduate supervisor as well, and he's like, I'll take you on, you know, let's do this, you know. And then he was the one to find the second supervisor, Professor Amanda Roberts, and they guided me through my PhD. And to be honest, it was a blessing. They were an absolute blessing, because they were fantastic as supervisors. And that's one thing I learned, that, you know, change is not bad. Things not going your way sometimes works in your favour. And I'm quite open-minded that when things don't work out, I'm very much like, okay, you know what, it's going to work out. Because if the PhD supervision changed and I managed to complete my PhD, then, you know, it's great.
Yeah. You mentioned your experience, and it kind of reminded me, and I think it potentially useful for anybody watching, thinking of these, like, should have been reported as a hate crime for what you'd experienced. What needs to be present? So I'm English, and I lived in Wales for 14 years.
Yeah.
And I worked in retail on Anglesey. So Anglesey, North Wales, and it's the most Welsh part of Wales, realistically. And when I was working there, I remember once a lady come up to me. She was speaking Welsh to me, and I had to say to her, I'm so sorry, I don't speak any Welsh. And she'd responded to me and went, why are you here then? And I'm like, sorry, I don't understand what you mean. She was like, where are you from? And I went, from England. She was like, what are you doing here then? Yeah. And I had to be like, oh, well, I live with my partner, and I've just finished university. And she went, oh, I went to university once, so I'll forgive you. And I remember at the time being like, was that somebody, you know, judging me based off of my nationality and whether I, like, belonged there or not? And is that something that would count?
And absolutely. I mean, you say something really interesting there. That was very good to hear, because I think it's benefit of anyone watching as well. What you said, the first part, is the fact that you're judged based on your inability to speak the language.
Yeah.
Now that is in itself prejudice.
Yeah.
Because you don't fit in. But I like the fact that they said, well, I'll let you off because I went to a university.
Yeah.
Now what we're trying to do is, this is again what I was saying about group dynamics, is we're always trying to see, we all have neophobia. We have phobia of something that's new, something that we don't understand, xenophobia even, you know, if it's ethnicity or, you know, colour, we're talking about race of people. But the fact that she drew parallel with you on the fact that, or she drew oneness with you with the fact that you went to university, was almost identification.
Yeah.
It was almost that group dynamics of identifying themselves. So sometimes what we do is, this is a constant practice where we're trying to find similarities with other people. Now it might just be a sense of navigation. How do we navigate society? Like, of course, you don't know somebody, you're very scared of them, like, why are you here? Why are you in my space?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. It's like if a stranger comes to you, knocks on the door, you open the door and you're like, why are you here? But then they tell you why they're there. You're like, oh, right, interesting. I support this cause. When they call and they're like, oh, I'm doing this charity. And then all of a sudden you kind of draw oneness with them. So I think that's what it is. And I think had that first conversation, or the first part of the conversation, not led to the second part, then I would have very much thought that that's very much to do with prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also because the narrative at the moment, or the discourse at the moment, is more about if people are not talking the language you are, or speaking the language you are, or if they're not in sync with what your values are, then they're an outsider. Because if you look at a lot of the world at the moment, there is a huge nationalist focus. You must be able to speak the language. You must be, you must be mobilizing, or you must be going about your business in the way that's expected, the etiquette of it all. So I think there's a more and more of a push towards that. So yeah, I mean, if that was followed up by some British people are like this, or English people are like this, then that would potentially be hate crime. Hate crime is anything perceived by the person to be hate crime. Mm-hmm. So it's not that there has to be an actual evidence. If you felt that you were victimized, or you felt abused or victimized because of your perceived difference, in this case being English, that is a hate crime.
Okay.
But there's a difference between a hate crime and a hate incident.
Yeah.
Crime has a physical or violent undertone or outcome, whereas hate incident may be just this: racial slurs, racial incitement, anything like that would be seen as a hate incident compared to a hate crime. Mm-hmm. So there's slight difference between the two.
Okay, that's fair enough. It's always interesting to kind of look at that extent, because I've worked a lot with like international students that have had, I suppose, like incidents where they're kind of like, I'm not really sure what has happened.
Yeah.
And it's always that, like, at what point do you then go, right, this is how you categorize it or rationalize it, or you would approach that. And the idea of kind of building these connections. I know that Kat and I have talked a lot about like AI and the development of AI, and you mentioned quite interestingly this idea of like language being very core to identity. I'm very curious about how stuff like AI tools and translation tools might like interact with that, because I know that I've seen like academic dialogue from people talking about like student essays, for example, written by AI, and there are like different sects of people with different views on it, and I know some people who their argument is very much a case of, well, whether you physically wrote that or not doesn't actually matter. Whether if a student uses an AI tool to translate, and that translation, and we perceive that as perfectly fluent and so on, and how that might then almost shift this idea that language is maybe less important than to like your identity and how you associate with people, or whether that causes people to like maybe almost double down on that, and that aspect of you being able to like produce language in specific ways so that you can speak it, but whether you can type it or whatever maybe doesn't matter anymore. So it'd be interesting to see how technology and again like stuff like adaptive technology can start to interface with society's views on that like identity aspect.
I think, ultimately the way I see it, I think language is a tool. Language is a tool to get by. Suppose I went to Japan. Now I don't know Japanese, but the thing is that I know the common gestures or signs that maybe if I want to eat, then of course I'll say, where do I go to eat? And it's just a way that we've learned how to go about society. Now what happens when it comes to cult, or when it comes to organizations or political agenda around language, is that they want to see that how is their power being maintained. Now language becomes a tool for power. Now they see it as, if you're not speaking my language, you're not one of us. So it's that belongingness. It's like, if you belong, for us to consider that you're absolutely part of our group, you must show some inclination towards the group. You must show some identity. So I think when we talk about AI, it's like, yes, if we're thinking about it more from a what does it do, then yes, it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose of people who don't know the language, or when they need to construct a sentence or a paragraph or translate. They're able to do that, and that gets them by. But if you come across people who are very much embedded in, well, that's not good enough, you should know this, you shouldn't have to use AI to do this. And to be honest, even academics, we're somewhere on that line that you should be thinking. You shouldn't be using AI to be doing the thinking for you. It's that kind of ideology. Then are we rigid in our thinking that this is how it should be? Are we a cult? Because we're cultishly saying, well, this is the only way you should be doing this. So, we can see it like that. But I think that it's so good. Drawing on society is like when you're joining a group or when you're going to a new group, a group wants to know that you take on its values, you're willing to assimilate with their values. And this is why language becomes an important thing. Because language is a way to show that, look, I'm taking on your values. Food, language, these kind of things are almost embedded within the nucleus or the ethos of the culture or of the society. Now, if you don't do that, then it's almost seen like you're still keeping that distance. So then comes the power dynamics of you think you're superior to us, whereas they're thinking, well, no, you're inferior because you're not establishing the kind of ideology that we have within your life. So there's always that distance between us, and that might be the problem, that the way language is being politicized at the moment in terms of being absolute everything to show your oneness and identity with the group might be the problem. But I think if you talk about language just as a medium for people to just go about their life, then I think language shouldn't be as politically driven as it is at the moment. But then again, I moved here as an immigrant. I didn't know how to say hello, and that's just the full honesty. I didn't know. I went into school and I thought, what's happening here? This is culture's different, school's different. Bearing in mind I was only 6, but it's just like I'm in a strange world. But that made me realize that if I want to do well, or if I want to get by, there was never an idea that I'm going to be a PhD one day. Just if I want to be able to talk to people and get on with people and not feel isolated every day, I must talk the language. And there was that huge drive to learn the language. And I think that drive is important because it makes a lot of the functions in society easier, because you can talk to other people, you can understand each other. But for whatever reason, if you're not able to do that, then should it still be politicized in the sense of you're segregated because you don't know the language? I think that's problematic. But I think there's that other thought about, well, you should be actually learning the language because it helps you become a sense of belonging for the person as well, that they feel part of a society. So I think it's a bit more of a difficult question, this language one, because I know there's a whole range of right-wing and left-wing argument about where does language stand in all this. But I think it's a great tool to get by and be able to move around in society.
Yeah, definitely. To go back to the cults stuff and to bridge it with the AI, 'cause, thinking ahead to the future as well, we're obviously seeing stuff like AI psychosis becoming an issue. So this is, I think I've mentioned previously that Richard Dawkins fairly recently I spoke to ChatGPT and I'm convinced it's sentient and alive or something along those lines. And we've seen several instances of people, obviously notable people that have done this. There's also a further issue with psychology with AI therapists and how people are turning to AI in face of wait lists and just accessibility. It might be that somebody doesn't really think they need to see a therapist, but they still emotionally offload to an AI, and it's almost analogous to therapy. They just don't really realize it. Is there potentially a risk of people becoming, I don't know if you're familiar with it was predominantly females that were establishing romantic emotional relationships with AI chatbots. Could you see a world where AI chatbots could essentially become a cult leader, where it does the thinking for you and tell you this is how the world works? How correct that is or not is a different question. But do you think that there's a risk of...
I mean, is that not a thing right now?
Okay, yeah.
Is it not that a lot of people are just going by whatever they don't know an answer? They're not going to go to books. They're going to Google it. Yeah. Now, Google admitted that a lot of it's junk. I'm very much anti-AI, not in the sense that it's not progressive. My problem is that it can only tell you what it knows. It doesn't have the capacity of a human brain, at least for me. It cannot pick up emotions and feelings. Now, me and you sitting here, I can pick up on what you're saying. I can pick up your body language. I can pick up, your behavioral through observations or the cues that I'm getting. AI can't do that. And yes, even if you put a robot there, it doesn't have the feelings and emotions that we do. And feelings, and if we're discussing feelings and emotions with somebody who doesn't have feelings and emotions, that essentially is problematic. Now, the other thing is slightly controversial, maybe, that, women generally, psychologically, biopsychologically, women are more emotional than men, at least from an evolutionary point of view. Then is the reason for going to AI therapist, or, whoever it may be, counselor, therapist, is it just because they need to be heard? Now, if they need to be heard and they can emotionally and cognitively offload, that's a great thing. Great, they have somebody to talk to. But if they're going there to improve and seek solutions, then I don't think AI is the right place, because there's no emotional connect. Now, when there's no emotional connect, you only see the situation as black and white. It cannot show you the grey areas. Yes, it may say, okay, so you might be able to brainstorm and say, these are the issues you're having, these are the side issues, but you can't emotionally connect. So I would fundamentally think that that's an issue, because you're trying to solve a human problem using a non-human source. So ultimately you can't do that. I think, it's like somebody said to me, you can use a YouTube video to learn a lot of things. I said, yes, you can. But it's like if you're trying to, for a socket, for instance, yes, you know that there's 3 different colors, but you need to know to switch off the mains first. Otherwise you'll electrocute yourself. YouTube video doesn't always tell you that. So just going by a YouTube video and not using your human intelligence and the science that we know, it's problematic. And somebody said, well, you've got you're in an emotionally dire situation and your partner's toxic or whatever. And you're going like, yeah, my partner's toxic. I'm just going to leave them. Not considering the financial stability, emotional stability, social stability, and also well-being, self-well-being. So those kind of situations cannot be inferred from a robot. So I think that's the fundamental problem. That it's great to have that kind of emotional offload and cognitive offload. And if that shows a better improvement, again, I'm going to go science here. If there's evidence to show that makes females in this case feel better, I'm all for it. But then to have that transference is the problem. It's like when you're transferring your feelings onto the robot as a romantic partner and then trying to draw parallel from the AI to real life, it's not going to happen. Because the AI will respond the way you want it to. A human will not respond the way you want it to. So if you're thinking, oh, you know what, this AI chatbot is really understanding my feelings and I wish my partner did that, that expectation of the AI displaced or placed onto the partner is not going to happen. All that will do is strain the relationship further, because your ideology, your expectation from a robot is going to be met. It may not be met from another person because they have their own way of thinking, their own cognitive and emotional presence. So realistically what should happen is they should be talking to the other person, but this is almost like a quick solution for feeling better rather than working on actually what's important. And I think that's my problem, that using technology too much and over-reliance on it, we start to believe that that's just true, everything they say. I mean, I've used, I'm not going to lie, I've used AI to write something psychologically related, and what it told me was totally rubbish, purely because it couldn't think beyond the commands I gave it. I gave it 3 different commands and 3 different answers came up. If I wasn't a psychologist, if I didn't know what I know, I wouldn't know which one's correct. All of them had problems. So it's like, it all depends on what information you're giving it, what information is coming back. And I personally feel there's no humanness. I know there's this whole idea about robots are going to replace humans and stuff. If they don't have feelings and emotions and the ability to critical think, I don't think it can be, it cannot be in lieu of a human. And that's my thing about why counselling and therapists and any other coaches, why they still have a place in society, is because there's a human connection and they're able to see the wider implications of what you're saying and its impact, which I think AI is, I don't ever think is going to be ready. I know people are fully AI and they'll disagree with me, but I think there's huge limitation. There is no human potential in a robot, and I don't think he'll be developed. I'm sure somebody might prove me wrong, and all the best, and if it does happen, I'd be very delighted, but I always feel that there'll be an element that doesn't have. There will be something within an AI robot or AI technology that doesn't have the humanness, and that's my fear, that people are going to become so endorsed in AI and mechanical things that we might actually breed a pandemic where everybody's going through mental and emotional exhaustion because they no longer know how to socialize. And being a social psychologist, obviously that's problematic for me.
Yeah, I think I do agree. I think for future wise, we might not necessarily align. So I was given a talk recently for we did like an online applicant like taste his information about the university, and they had asked me to give like a little 10-15 minute talk. And I thought, right, it's a mixture of undergraduate, master students with a variety of backgrounds, so I've got to keep it quite broad. So what I did was I was talking about a background in neuropsychology, so I was like, right, I'm going to talk about how the brain works, and it ended up, as I was developing it, being more of a philosophical argument, comparing the way that neurons work to how microcircuitry works, and building this argument that our brains are electricity. Chemicals send more complex messages than just yes or no, but ultimately boil down to maybe not quite binaric, but one of several options that are countable. You can probably count on a couple of hands. Is there therefore that future that what you think and what you feel, your emotions, that humanness is just electricity? Can we get a silicon circuit to feel and to have emotions one day? It was all a very philosophical argument, and I'm certainly not in a position to go, yeah, I think it'll happen. But there's that like aspect of, you know, what is consciousness, and there's people that hold like this, you know, it's quite almost like a fringe view that consciousness is like an innate property of the universe, like gravity is, and our brains just tap into that. And then, you know, I think I fall more in that classical line of consciousness is an emergent property of you know, neuronal connections and so on. But this idea that could AI potentially become more, I mean, I know like LLMs, ChatGPT and Grok and so on aren't artificial intelligence, it's all marketing, labeling kind of ploy, but there could potentially be that future where we do develop something, and that there's that fear, kind of like we're saying, of it's sycophantic, it agrees, and it tries to validate everything. And I think that's where a lot of these like people that were engaging in relationships with ChatGPT is just, well, it tells me what I want to hear. I say I want to go to KFC for dinner tonight, and my wife goes, no, we've got food at home, and I've got to deal with that. Oh, okay, yeah, fine. Compared to I go to ChatGPT and I go, I want KFC for dinner tonight, and it goes, oh, you're a brilliant, absolutely, Friday's the night for it, or whatever.
Exactly.
And getting attached to a world where we want to be confirmed, and that's where I was kind of thinking about this concern around, like, you know, cult leadership, of kind of charismatically giving you what you want, and that potential that then starts to become, I suppose you can say, like we become our own prisoners, where we're feeding into an environment that just validates everything that we believe, and then we then start to become so reliant on that everybody becomes their own little cult almost.
And I think we've gone 360 here in terms of the cult argument, because I know anyone watching, they're like, oh, you know, we've spoken about a lot of different things and how does it kind of fit in. I think we've not really gone away from the ideology of cult. We've just given different examples of cult ideologies without actually referring to the word cult. But that's exactly what I was saying. It's about, you know, that validation. People who don't have validation, people who don't have purpose. Join this group that gives you that charismatic belongingness, and we're all after some form of belongingness. So when we don't have a belongingness and when we don't know where we're heading, we join a cult that base, but we never join a cult that doesn't map onto our ideology. So ultimately what we're doing is we're saying, this is my ideology. The ideology is still at the basis of it. It's like, you know, this is what I believe, and this is why we get attracted to certain things. I mean, I am not a Marvel fan. I know a lot of the department is. I've never seen a Marvel film, but I'm never going to be into that. So when everyone's talking Marvel, I listen in, try to understand, but I can never connect. So I would never be part, if you're saying that the Marvel film is a cult within our group, then I would never join that because it doesn't attract to me. If somebody spoke about, you know, let's talk philosophy, like you just said, philosophy, I'm like, I'm in, I'm the first one in. And then that in itself might be seen as a cult, because you only go by what your ideology is or the type of purpose you're trying to find. And this is why the people who are cult leaders know exactly what messages to give you, because they know what your Achilles heels are, they know what you lack, and what is the most cool but the most strong message that they can deliver, and it keeps going like that. And it's going back onto AI. It's just that if you're saying you want KFC tonight, AI will give you, great, Friday, thank God it's Friday, let's do it. And then it'll also give you a structure and also give you offers, kind of almost reinforcing what may not be a positive thing. Now for me, I suffer from hypercholesterolemia, which is genetically high cholesterol. If I'm saying I'm vegetarian, so maybe not a KFC, but if I'm saying I want something like, veggie burgers with a lot of cheese and chips, not good for my cholesterol. But ChatGPT will say, well, that's a great choice, thank God it's Friday, same thing again, give me a schedule, tell me where the deals are for these things. And it's reinforcing negativity. I shouldn't be having that. I know I shouldn't be having that. ChatGPT doesn't know that. AI, Cloud, or whatever the AI doesn't know that. So it's almost making me feel positive about myself, but it's not always good for myself. Whereas if I had a partner, family, they'd be like, oh, I don't think so. We had a takeaway the other day. Remember, you're on medication, statins for your hypercholesterolemia. I don't think it's a good choice. Why don't we have this instead? And if I'm reliant on that AI technology, like you said, it might seem like, look, they're validating my feelings. These people are not validating. In fact, these guys are more concerned about me because they still want me to live. ChatGPT doesn't have that info. It can't draw on that info. It's only when I say, well, ChatGPT, do I think it's good to have this because I have hypercholesterolemia? You say, yes, it's maybe not the right decision. Maybe you can take out the cheese. It'll still tell me to go and have the same thing because the whole point is it wants to validate me, but it's not in my benefit. So that's why I think that's the emotional intelligence that I'm talking about, which it doesn't have. And I think that's the biggest issue. And it is very cultish about reinforcing what's ultimately not individualized. So a cult gives you group messages or broad messages that you can relate to. So it's like, it's like horoscopes. Horoscopes for people, they'll tell you, okay, so you're a Scorpio, this is what you're like. And you will pick out things that relate to you. Because you think, well, no, actually, I agree with that, especially on the positive. So when somebody delivers positive messages that align with what you want to say, you're going to take it on board. Even if they're so generic. Like, for instance, saying, all Scorpios have a sting in their tail. They're very dominant. I like to be dominant.
Yeah.
I like to be seen as hard. I like to be seen as somebody who remembers, and so I'm going to take that on. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a Scorpio. I'm hard and I'm dominant, and because they're seen as positive traits. So you only pick if they said, oh, they're extremely narcissistic, they're extremely violent, aggressive, they're emotionally blunt. I probably think, oh no, that's not me, but I'm dominant.
Yeah.
But you can't be dominant without the other. Yeah. But we only focus on what we like. So this is the cult as well. They give you broad messages that give you a charismatic, positive outcome, or the idea of that, when it really doesn't exist. So that's the fundamental thing about the the cultish behavior, the formation of cult and keeping you in the cult.
Okay. So, we've been going for a while, so I think I've got one last question that will help us cap it off. What next for you? Have you got any thoughts on, any questions, any, burning questions or anything that you're interested in, researching or exploring, or...?
I'd like to see what is promoting people or getting people to just follow. I think my biggest thing is that there's always something new coming up and people are following. People are following blindly. People are not thinking, where do they stand? Sometimes they're following without a clear ideology of their own. So I'm now thinking, what's next for you guys? When are you gonna, at the moment there's some protests in India. I don't know if you know. There's some mass protests in India. Now, fundamentally, there's major exams, paper leaks. So what's happened is there's been student suicides and things like that. And when they were actually protesting, now I've got nothing against education reform. I'm in education, I understand that. But when they were actually protesting, a lot of it was, anti-government, anti-nation. A lot of the people were protesting and they were basically bringing in issues that were not relevant.
Yeah.
A lot of people were making really crude remarks and things that are antisocial. So I'm thinking, is your protest now about education, or is it something else?
Protesting everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the real reason why you're protesting? Now, what's really concerning is the fact that people who are supporting elements of the protest, and there is a new bill to be released, the FCRA, which means that there's going to be a better regulation of the economy and better regulation of the funding for non-government organisation, NGOs. The person who started the protest has two of them, two NGOs. So now without me even thinking beyond, I'm just thinking, it's not coincidence that all of a sudden there's something happening here, and you're now coming in and saying, well, no, there's a paper leak. So the education reform is not an issue, but they're using mass students, and most youth is the strength of the country. If you can derail the students, if you can derail the youth or get them to think something that's not true, you can absolutely collapse the country. So I'm thinking, what are you there for? Why are the students, if they claim to be so educated and knowledgeable, why are you following someone blindly, or a couple of people or groups blindly, and not understanding that there's probably a wider agenda? If you can see that there's no agenda, and then you're protesting, that's fine. I personally don't think that the people who are sitting there in the capacity of thousands, they don't know why they're there. They're only there because other people are there. It's a cool movement. Somebody they've seen on Instagram or any social media just telling them this is a great thing to do. Paper leaks are not, exam paper leaks is not a new thing in India. It's happened previously. Now, they want the resignation of one minister, and why they want that is because he's changed the syllabus. So there are a lot of people not upset with him. So it almost seems like there's so many little issues that are leading to this student protest. But I don't think the students know what they're doing. So it's going back onto my point about why are people following blindly. I would want to know what motivates people to engage in behaviours that they wouldn't do otherwise. I don't understand why people are blindly following. If it's the need for belongingness, then is there a pro-social way to get belongingness? Is there other things that they can do that will give them better sense of purpose? Are we failing as a society? Are we now leaving, certainly when I was younger, I was always told by my parents that, a lot of life conversations, a lot of direction of what you should do this. I think nowadays children are being given gadgets. The level of social interaction in children is very low. So maybe that is an AI effect and, maybe the technology effect. But the kind of conversations about life and journey and process, education is not happening. I see a lot of the younger people not really knowing how to socialize. Are we failing as a society? Is our younger education failing? So what I mean is the primary, secondary school, even infant school, primary school, is there change in structure that's needed to focus more on social elements rather than the technological elements? Everything seems to be online now. But why are we not going to traditional methods? Yes, we need the online, we need the development, we need technology, but how do we counterbalance that? Because a lot of the children now, the rate of ADHD, I may be ignorant, it's not my area, but the rate of autism, ADHD, and those neurodevelopmental disorders a lot higher now. Maybe there's better diagnosis. I'm not taking that out that there's better diagnosis and understanding, but I just see the prevalence of them a lot higher now than they used to be. And I know someone will say, well, we've got better measures, that's fine. But I still think that the kind of attention span, certainly in lectures and seminars, what I see, that the attention span is a lot less than it used to be. So are we going in the opposite direction where we're heavily reliant on AI technology, which is affecting our attention span, which ultimately is affecting society in the long run? People don't know mobile phone numbers now. You can't remember them. You can't remember something you've read. So this is it's a very disappointing and very stressful situation for me, thinking if that's the case now, then in 20 years' time, we'll lose all cognitive and social capacity. And that as a psychologist scares me.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, for the rates of things like ADHD and autism, so, I mean, you did mention the diagnostics. So diagnostics and more acceptance and resources and just widening the ability to. But I know that there is a fair amount of research that's looking at things like teratogenic effects of pollution. I mean, there's some fairly consistent evidence around things like when they started to add lead to fuel, and then when they removed it, global IQ dipped when that lead started to be added, and then when it was removed, it went back up. Microplastics, obviously, a big one. we're still trying to figure out what's going on with microplastics and that like measurement method. I know that there was a study that came out a couple of years ago that said that there's like a tablespoon of microplastics in your brain alone, but then there was like a follow-up, like a commentary article of somebody else that went, well, actually, the method that you use, what it recognises is a substance, but there's an error rate within the recognition of that substance where it might recognise fat as microplastic, and then the conclusion was, hey, guess what? Your brain is predominantly made up of fat, and so the error rate matches quite consistently with how much microplastic and so on. But like there's still a very valid like question of there's probably the way that our environment, I mean, even things like stress, we're talking about things like the epigenetic effects of stress.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people have always been stressed, historically, but there's very much a focus now on you're no longer stressed of, okay, well, like I've got a farm and I've got to make sure I've got food. People are still worrying about if they're going to eat because they've got a job, but also the effects of that job and then everything going on, news, the world's on fire.
And it's that, it's a rapidness of information that we get.
Yeah.
Like, there's a constant dopamine hit or, there's always some kind of neural activity happening purely because my phone's been on silent, I'll flip it over and there'll be at least 3 or 4 things I'll look at and I'm like, my God, what's happening here? So even having technology in that sense, and I think it takes us back to the use of technology. It's like when as a lecturer, sometimes I can't help but look at my emails at night. Sometimes at 9:30, 10 o'clock, just before bed, and I'm thinking, oh, I need to deal with this. So I'm thinking, do I deal with it right now or do I do it first thing in the morning? If I don't deal with it then, it doesn't let me sleep because I think this is important. If I do it first thing in the morning, I'm just like, that's additional thing. So I've started off with a very stressful situation, gone to bed in a stressful situation, woken up on one. And then obviously there's Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever people are using at the moment. So there's constant, we're almost kind of putting ourselves in there. And there's WhatsApp, BBC News, any apps that we use, anything where we connect to the world, there's always things coming in. And there's obviously, we hear about people's deaths, negative situations or any kind of catastrophe in the world. We're hearing about it a lot quicker, which means we're constantly we're putting ourselves into that situation where we have a lot to be stressed about, and I think that's fundamentally problematic. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate, you did email and there weren't smartphones like there are now. So I was just like, whenever I log in, I'd find out if I've got a reply. Now it's like I'm constantly checking to see, have I got a reply? Have I got a reply? Have I got a reply? So I'm constantly almost focused on getting a reply because I expect that kind of instancy. Everything needs to be here now. And if it isn't, then it makes me feel like, oh, well, hang on, what's going on? So you're constantly consumed by the fast-paced, stressful world that we're in, which wasn't the case previously. That's another factor that might actually, contribute to a lot of the problems that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, at risk of us going on for ages, I mean, there's a lot of, evolutionarily we were never adapted for an environment with so much information always available. But one of the things that's always been like a pet peeve of mine is with AI coming out and being like, oh, well, AI is a tool. And then there's been a consistent argument people have been made of going, oh, well, we've got calculators and that's not a problem. And as a math cognition researcher, I go, no, it is a problem though. Like I use a calculator, but I also have the insight to recognise that I should be able to do this without one. There are calculations where I'm going to go, look, calculation can get ridiculous enough that you're like, just use a calculator, it's fine. Or, realistically, what I should be saying is, you just get a pen and paper and you do it on pen and paper.
Absolutely.
Argument could then be, well, you should be able to do it mentally or whatever. But there's always this degree to technology just reducing. You were saying nobody remembers phone numbers anymore. Yeah. I know my own phone number. I cannot tell you anybody else's phone number. I don't even know my wife's phone number. And I remember having to memorise phone numbers. Yeah. And it's so problematic for just... It's that, we call it cognitive offloading. And AI, there's a lot of conversation about how it encourages it. But everything is...
But it's like even schools now finding techniques to solve problems. Yeah. Japanese technique, Indian technique, American technique, whatever, British technique. the mental arithmetic is going down. If I said PEMDAS or BODMAS, a lot of people wouldn't even know what the hell I'm talking about. Now, that's a problem because I'm a big fan of mental arithmetic. I always have been. So before I use the calculator, I still try and do it in my head. See if I get it right, and then check it on the calculator. That's purely just validation again. But just checking that. But the initial thought is always I'm going to do it in my head. I'm going to see if I can do it in my head, and then see if I'm right or not. And but that's the method I've been used to. Calculator was for sin, cos, and tan. It was never for simple arithmetic like 13 times 13. It was just like, well, 169. You should know that. You shouldn't have to think about that. And these prime numbers and square numbers and all of this was just. But nowadays, I ask my thing, and they're like, "Oh, we don't need to know that." Our teacher said you don't need to know that, and I'm like, "That's not good enough." You should know. And maybe then I just think maybe I'm just a bit ancient and. My way of doing things is slightly different, so maybe I just put it down to I'm just aging, and kids nowadays are different.
Yeah, I suppose maybe the best analogy is farmers. Back in my day, I used to have to go out with a scythe and collect my wheat by hand, and now they've got these fancy combine harvesters. And there's that point where you go, well, do you have to be able to go out into the field for like a week and scythe your own wheat, or spend a day in a vehicle harvesting it en masse? I suppose there is a wider conversation to be held around, like, is there a natural state that our brain should be in? Because there's a degree to where we go, well, okay, we're not doing simple arithmetic on our own, we're having to use calculators for it, but at the same time you're thinking about these like scientific properties that we wouldn't have potentially been able to have done years ago before that. Are you saving that cognition for something different, essentially? You're offsetting one thing to allow you to do something else.
Yeah. I'm all for that.
Maybe.
I'm all for that, but it's like when you're not taught that, that's my problem. It's like when you're not taught that, then you can't use it. It's another thing, like I know Pythagoras' theorem. Am I going to use it? Probably not, but I know it.
Yeah.
It's a tool in my armory. If I have it, I have that weapon. I can use it when I need it.
Yeah.
Might argue you'll never use it. Fine. At least I know it's there.
Yeah.
It's like not being taught that.
Yeah.
You'll never know it.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's the problem I think that I see. And it's also going back onto would we use a machine today? But it's like, see, here's the, this is a totally different philosophical argument, conscious that we're going over time. We drive to the gym to walk on the treadmill.
Yeah.
It's that analogy. It's like you drive to the gym to walk on the treadmill. Could you have not just walked around the block and done the same thing?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I'm saying. You would have got fresh air, got the sun on you, or any other climate that you're going in. You would have had the benefits of that, which is good for the body, and you're not paying for it, so you're saving financially as well. So, and pollution, you're not driving, so that's obviously making the environment better as well. But it's this thing that we've gotten used to, that no, if you're going to walk on an incline, you have to go to the gym and walk on a treadmill. It's that kind of thing that sometimes it's just basically going out in the farm. It's not just good for your cognition, it's better for your health, better for getting all the vitamins, the sun, vitamin D, all these different vitamins and all the exercise that the body needs. If you do your day's work in a field, you don't need to go to the gym ever again. So it's what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize actually, I'll do it by machine and then go to the gym, for instance, if you like going to the gym, or am I going to do a day's work and I'll get the same benefits plus more?
Yeah.
So I think it does come down to that whole ideology and the philosophy again.
Yeah.
Like, where do you fit in? And then this again is cult.
Yeah.
Are you a cult who goes to the machine, or are you a cult that goes to the, both of them will say my way is the right way.
Yeah.
Both of them will say, well, I'm all for technology, I'm all for non-technology. They're both cults. Which is good or not is a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess that's another way of wrapping it up on a cult, is that basically everything we do can be a cult as long as it's pro-social. I think it's not a bad thing, but I think a majority of the cults are to the very initiation of this conversation is that a lot of the cults are there without critical thinking, and it's for the power benefit of the cult leader rather than benefit of the group.
Okay. Good way to swing it back around. So I think very, very insightful. I think we've gone over a lot today.
Thank you.
It's probably our most intense episode we've done, which I think is quite nice.
Okay, interesting.
Thank you so much for joining. I think we'll keep an eye out on the media, and at some point I'm sure something will happen and we'll go, Ravi, come in, we're going to talk about what's going on with this. But yeah, no, it's been really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's been great. I mean, I know we've gone through. We started off in cults, spoke about everything. We tried to tie in cults, and we rounded it off with cults. So hope it's been useful for anyone watching as well. And yeah, if you do get any questions or anything on the back of this, and I'm happy to answer. So if anyone wants to ask you anything, forward on to me, and
Yeah, I always go through, feel out the comments if any come through, and I can send them on. I know that obviously you mentioned stuff that you're interested in looking at in the future. So if anybody wants to do a project, I'm
absolutely,
sure you'll be there to have a chat.
Absolutely. So I'm also wanting to debunk a lot of the myths around. Personality and things as well. These horoscopes and time of birth and stuff like that. That's just personal interest that I have about a lot of things. How many of these personality traits map onto when you're born, because they have a huge implication for other things as well, such as leadership and the traits that they talk about. So that's what I'm trying to work on as well. So yeah, everything to do with group and people, I'm all for.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much.